Hello, everyone. Testing. 1, 2, 3. 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 Sarah? Okay, well, good evening everyone. Welcome to everyone here in the room. Welcome to those online. A special welcome to Dr. Ruth Sims, who's, of course, giving our talk tonight. So if you thought it was a different talk, this is going to be a very exciting talk. This is the talk. I will introduce Ruth more formally soon. I obviously know her quite well, which is why I'm being flippant. But first we will have an acknowledgement. We acknowledge the Kaurna people as the traditional custodians of the Adelaide Plains. We honour and respect their elders and their ongoing care and spiritual relationship with country. We do so in the spirit of reconciliation for all of Australia's First Nations people. So we're delighted to have Dr. Ruth Sims here in her home church building. So she probably feels quite welcome, even more so than usual. I'm going to assume that you have read the background material about Ruth and her topic that was sent out ahead of the forum, so I'm not going to repeat it. I should say that normally Ruth works as a consultant and she's not here touting for business, but should you be interested or think one of your friends might be be helped by her consultancy, ruth-sims.com is her website, and she has cards somewhere out in the foyer that you can take should you forget that, which I would if it was me. Okay, so since her PhD involving followership at the University of South Australia, Dr. Sims, not Dr. Ruth, has become known as the followership whisperer. Now, if you don't believe me, log on to her website and there it is right up the top, followership whisperer. Like me, you've probably heard of varying leadership styles and types, such as servant leadership, values-based leadership, principles-based leadership, sacrificial leadership, shared leadership, relational leadership, and transformational leadership, just to mention a few. And you may assume that these and other forms of leadership require followers and followership. That is my assumption, but I could be wrong, and we're going to find out. With the help of Google, I now know that there is actually a global followership network and global followership conferences, and that can only mean that there will be a global journal for followership before long, but I wasn't able to ascertain any more about that. Anyway, exactly what Ruth means by followership and what implications there may be for progressive Christianity is unclear to me, and it may be to you. So I'm particularly keen to hear what Ruth has to say. Ruth would normally run a very interactive session, but she's mindful that we've got a number of people online, which imposes a constraint on how much is said and done out of view of the recording. But we can remedy any shortfall during the Q&A session. So, just to let you know how that'll work, after Ruth's talk, if you want to speak, please raise your hand. Because there'll be crowds of you doing that, I will moderate to make sure that one is chosen. If you're invited, come up to the lectern microphone and continue to speak into the microphone, directly into it. Sometimes people have been so gracious that they want to look at the speaker over here, and of course you can't hear through the microphone, particularly if you're online, but even in the room. So please do that when you're either asking a short question or making a short comment. So, without further ado, please welcome Ruth to give her presentation.
Thanks, Kim. You're sitting quite a long way away. That's okay, we'll get you involved anyway. What I'm going to do this evening is to quite briefly touch on what I understand being progressive means, and you may or may not agree with me. It's probably progressive to disagree, actually. We'll spend a little bit of time looking at leadership before we shift our focus to followership. And then I guess I want to highlight some possible alignments between followership and being progressive, and finish up with whether or not it has some faith-based implications for us. And then open it up to conversation, because that's where the good stuff really happens. But before we get going, I want you to take the piece of card that you've been given and your pen or pencil, and I want you to draw, so no words, I want you to draw the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word follower. The very first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word follower. Draw it for me. I'm not giving you very long, and stick figures are fine. And you can play along at home if you want to as well. First thing that comes to mind, don't overthink it. How are we doing? Are we done? A couple more, just a few more seconds. Okay. If you're in the room or you're sitting with someone at home, show the person next to you what you drew. What did you draw? Okay, now tell me, what did you draw? Kim, what did you draw? You didn't get a chance to share your picture. A child following a parent, thank you. What else did people draw?
I could do the same.
That's interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
An adult following an adult.
An adult following an adult. What else have we got?
Kids following
A teacher and some students? Dorothea.
A dinghy following a sailboat. That was the first thing that came into my mind.
A what, sorry?
A dinghy.
A dinghy following a sailboat. Esmond,
I put a dog
you've got a dog.
leading an adult.
I like that. Are there any sheep? We've got a sheep. There is almost always a sheep. What else have we got? What else have you drawn? You've got a football followers? Thank you.
I've got a horse. I'm a following horse.
You've got a horse. Does anyone have anything different, anything we've not explored yet?
I've got a cross, but I just had two scam calls and I don't want to follow them.
I've got a duck followed by 3 little ducks.
Duck and ducklings, nice. Sarah.
I've got two people walking on a path together.
Uh-huh. So, what do we notice about our drawings?
They're all very literal.
They can all be, yep. And I did set that up a little bit.
Most are hierarchical.
Most imply hierarchy, yeah.
There's some sort of leader and something following.
Yep. But they're not all the same. No. Did any of you draw your drawing and then go, oh, but I shouldn't? This is what came to mind, but a bit embarrassed about that. No? Quite often that is people's response to this, especially if they draw something that might be conceived as a bit negative, or a sheep perhaps. Often people go, oh, I've drawn a sheep, but I don't really think follow is a sheep. That's the first thing that came to mind. Okay. So we come to this notion of followership with a whole lot of different ideas in our heads. None of those are wrong. They're in our heads. They can't be wrong. But we don't all see this the same way, and we often assume that we do. We could do exactly the same exercise in relation to leadership, and we would get a similarly diverse spread of drawings and ways of thinking about this. So I'd like you just to put that activity to one side for now. We'll move on and we'll come back to it a little bit later. So let's move to being progressive. And I had a lot of trouble with this, partly because I know some of you really well. I know some of you not at all. I've known some of you for longer than either of us are going to confess. And my mum's in the room, so hey. I had a lot of trouble with this, and it was helped by a conversation with Sarah. So I think the way that I want to think about being progressive is that it's an attitude, not a checklist. I think it's about asking questions without knowing all the answers. I think it's about thinking outside the box, whatever the box is. I also think it's about building bigger boxes. Okay? I think part of being progressive, and this sounds conservative, but I don't think it is about scraping off what has unhelpfully accumulated over time so that we can get back to the real stuff. And I think it's willing to be, to entertain and be persuaded by alternative points of view. So that's how I'm coming to this conversation. And if we are willing to entertain and even, I hope, be persuaded by different points of view, that gives us a position to scrutinise leadership. So we live, and most of my work is done in organisations. So we live in a society and we work in organisations where we've got some really weird ideas about leadership. And even if we go, oh, but that's not what I really think, the stuff that comes to mind, like the exercise we just did, some of the stuff that comes to mind, you go, whoa, that is seriously weird. Where did that come from? So we tend to think of heroes as leaders. They rescue us. They solve problems. They have all the answers. The leader knows what's going on. We tend to be really fixed on hierarchy, and I think that's partly because we're human and that's how our brains work. But then we ascribe to people with positional authority a sort of power and influence that you go, whoa, really? Not sure that's helpful. We pay a lot of attention to positional power. And this is despite the fact that we also know that traditional leadership and the ways that we traditionally do leadership development, they often don't work. So the way we think about leadership, both academically and it has flowed through all those consultants, it was a bit of a hard sell earlier, Kim, but all those other consultants, the way that folk often think and teach about leadership, it's based, I was going to say Western, but it's not even Western, it's a North American understanding of the way the world works. It's industrialised. And it's military. That's where a lot of the early research comes from and where a lot of the research still comes from. Who has money to conduct research? And who needs really good leadership and followership? So it's not surprising, but it gives it a flavour that we might want to question a little bit. So it's based on Western, industrialised, often military understandings of organisations and their structures and how organisations should work. But there is evidence that this doesn't really work in real life. So Alex Haslam, Professor Alex Haslam, he's now at the University of Queensland. He and colleagues did a study in 1998. This is some time ago. We've known a lot of this stuff for a very long time. 1998. That randomly chosen leaders outperform those who are carefully selected. Think about that for a moment. Although the carefully selected ones do enjoy leading more. We also know that studies of CEOs' influence, what they find very significantly. So it might be that the chief executive officer's influence on their organisation's success, it might be as high as 38.5%. So that means that 60% of an organisation's success can't be attributed to its CEO. A more recent study suggests a lower CEO effect of 11.5%. And it's even been argued that the effect that a CEO has on their organisation can't be distinguished from chance. And yet, who are the important people in organisations? We've got some recent statistics from a 2026 paper published by the Academy of Management. So these are sort of, if you want to do hierarchy, these are the bee's knees. And there's been a really interesting paper just published saying that leadership development is not a luxury good, should not be a luxury good. Organisations, they say, spent almost $60 billion on leadership development in the year before they submitted their paper for publication. Might not have been last year, might have been before that. 60 billion, that's a lot of money. But only a third of human resources executives feel that what their organisation is currently doing in leadership development programming is actually effective in preparing leaders for the future. So we're spending a lot of money, we're spending a lot of time, we're not altogether sure we're getting the outcomes that we want. And it's kind of not surprising because organisations, they're too complex and too complicated for single, special individuals to be responsible for everything on their own and to be telling less special people what to do and how to do it. That model just really doesn't work, even though we perpetuate it. Now, there is some more recent leadership research. So there are some emerging understandings about leadership. Shared leadership, emergent leadership in teams, and complexity leadership. These ways of thinking about leadership involve all participants. So leadership is what everybody does, not special people doing to less special people. And these ways of thinking about leadership as a process, as a system, as emergent, so coming out of the interactions that occur, they're happening because single individuals in modern, complex and complicated organisations, they're unlikely to be able to exhibit all of the behaviours that are necessary. You can't expect one person to be able to do all the leadership things we expect of them. And leadership does not reside in one part or one level of an organisation. So among leadership researchers, leadership is increasingly understood as a process involving leaders and followers as mutually influential agents. They affect each other and they both have agency, they both have power, they both have the ability to act. And leadership relies on interactions and relationships. Some recent work by Nathan Eva and colleagues, Nathan's at Monash University, they looked at the different leadership styles and what set them apart from each other. And you rattled off a whole lot, and there are more. And what they found was that there really wasn't, the way leadership is measured, it doesn't vary much style to style. It's really measuring the same thing, calling it different names. Academics do that a lot because it makes their work special. And what they did find, though, was it was the relationship and the quality of the relationship that's important. And so their advice to people who want to be good leaders was pay attention to the relationships, because that is what makes a difference. It's not exactly rocket science. But it's a new way of thinking about it. And importantly, both partners, and I'm going to use the terminology leaders and followers, both partners engage in followership and in leaders. So followers lead, leaders follow, both engage in leadership and followership to accomplish shared goals. Now, Alex Haslam, again, he might be a little embarrassed that I've mentioned him twice in the one talk. They've got a recent paper, 2024 paper, on zombie leadership. So it is, if you're into academic papers, this one is actually funny. It's laugh out loud funny. It's really clever. What they've done is to look at the outmoded ideas, the ideas that research shows are not accurate, and yet they live on like zombies among us. They won't die. And what Alex and his colleagues have done is they say there are 3 key zombie claims. And I'll run through those. And then there are 4 key zombie claims, and then there are 4 zombie killers. So the zombie claims are that only leaders can lead, so people with positional leadership titles. That leaders have qualities that set them aside from ordinary people. That group success should be attributed to leaders, and that history is the story of great leaders. And what he and his colleagues have found is no, research shows that every single one of those assumptions is wrong. And they came up with 4 zombie killing points. And what they say, by contrast, is that leadership is grounded in relationships and connections. That without some form of followership, there can be no leadership. There's a great Mark Twain, I think it's Mark Twain quote, that if you're leading and nobody's following, you're simply taking a walk. Haslam and colleagues say that leadership is more about getting people to want to do things than making them do them. Now, I have some differences with him around motivation. I don't think anyone can actually get somebody else to want to do anything that they don't want to do. You can influence, but the whole leaders motivate followers argument I don't have much truck with. But the idea that leadership is not coercive, that it's influential but not coercive, I think is really valuable. And they finish by saying that leadership is a group process, and it's ultimately about the activities of collectives and not just individuals. So there's a groupiness to it. So, why did I start wondering about leadership and followership? And why did I start thinking, yeah, maybe the way that we're taught to think about this stuff just doesn't quite hold true? Now, I've got at least 3 stories that I could tell you. One from my childhood, one from my early working life, and this one. So one of the jobs that I've had was in a large unit in an Australian university. The unit and the university should probably remain unknown, but Esmond and I worked there together for many years, not in the same unit. And I reported to the director of this unit, and for various reasons, both good and mostly bad, the person who filled that role changed often. We had 6 people either appointed to or acting in the director's role over 4 years. It was a revolving door. Now, there were a number of reasons for that. One was the more senior manager. Oh my goodness, he was trouble. But while the director's office door was revolving and people were coming in and going out and coming in and going out, and oh my goodness, it was exhausting, the work of the unit still got done. And the managers in the unit, sometimes we worked in collaboration with the director, and sometimes we worked in collaboration to engage with the director as little as possible. And it was often really, really difficult for the managers in that team and for the teams that they led. It was pretty awful. But despite this, plans were made and implemented, targets were met, stakeholders were communicated with, the work got done. Work actually got done well. And could we have done it better, more efficiently, more productively, with less angst, if there had been consistent, high-quality leadership and support? Yeah, of course we could. It would have made our jobs so much easier and rather more pleasant. But that lack didn't prevent good outcomes. And so that experience really got me to thinking that there has to be more to organisational success than good leadership. And I Googled followership and discovered that I wasn't the first person to think about it. But I thought, that's interesting, there's something there. So on the Scottish Parliament building, they've got a number of different sort of phrases, sentences, fragments. And what they've chosen is amazing. It is, look it up, it's glorious. It's also a fabulous building. One of the pieces that they've chosen is by Glaswegian writer and artist Alasdair Gray. And he said, "Work as if you live in the early days of a better nation." I'm going to say that again. Work as if you live in the early days of a better nation. And I think thinking about followership is a little bit like that, because outdated stories about organisations don't serve us well. Okay. And we've looked at the amount of money we spend on professional development. I've got just 3 ways in which I think these outdated stories don't serve us, and then we'll shift the focus. So when we think about organisational culture, every organisation thinks about organisational culture a lot, except when they don't. We've got this notion that boards and C-suite leaders set the organisational tone. They set the culture, it's their job. And they're supported by HR and the rollout of statements and frameworks and those posters you see in lifts. But what if organisational culture bubbles up rather than trickling down? So I would argue that everybody in an organisation contributes to its culture, because culture reflects how we actually do things here. Can you see the shift we're making? In traditional hierarchical organisations, people think that leaders' jobs is to solve problems. What instead if their job was to make it easier for the people in the organisation who might be able to solve the problem to do so? What if the people closest to the problem were given the resources and the support to solve said problem? That would be amazing, wouldn't it? It also takes the undue and I think impossible burden of being all-knowing off the leader. And it involves others with skills, experience and knowledge to do what they do best. Again, you see the slight, it's a little shift, but it's momentous. So rather than leaders looking like singular heroes with special abilities who either rescue or direct others, we're hearing more frequently that leadership is relational and that leadership is demonstrated in, and I would say it arises from, interpersonal interactions. But even when we're thinking about this and when leadership scholars take these other views, there's often still a missing piece, and I think that missing piece is followership. So let's shift the focus. I don't think you can just take leadership and do a find and replace. Followership is not, got it, sorted. It's not the mirror image of leadership. It is something of itself, okay? And in terms of definition, every academic likes a definition, and this is mine, and it's been published, so at least 2 peer reviewers and my examiners agreed with me, or thought it was plausible at any rate. I think that followership is the active contribution by followers to the leadership relationship and the leadership process. So it's active, it's contributing. There are followers and leaders. At a moment in time, we'll talk about that, it can shift, probably should shift, and shift back and shift again. And it's the contribution to both the leadership relationship, so that relationship that we have with other people we work with, and at its most local, it's that dyadic relationship, it's the one-on-one. Even in a group, you've got a range of one-on-one relationships. And the leadership process. So the process is there are inputs, something happens, there are outputs. And so we can think of leadership in these 2 ways. They're different ways of thinking about it, but they're both okay. And that's part of the complexity when we're talking about this stuff. There's not one simple, straightforward path. So how do followership researchers understand followership? There are a number of different ways, and we don't all agree. You'd be surprised to hear. But here are some ways that it's being thought about. So follower and leader are sometimes understood as individuals' roles in relationship to each other and sharing a common purpose. So the relationship is important, the common purpose is important. The roles, some people see it as role-based, others don't. But we can live with that, okay? So individuals' roles in relationship with each other, sharing a common purpose. Researchers would say that followers are active participants and they engage in followership behaviours. They're not passive recipients of leadership. That the role and behaviours of a follower may, or may not, mirror participants' positional status in an organisation. So we're unhitching leadership and followership from organisational hierarchy. Not all of us. Some of us are trying to do this, and it's difficult because of all that stuff we carry around in our heads. So it may be that in an organisation you've got leadership and followership occurring, and it's the managers doing leadership largely, and it's the staff members doing followership largely, and you go, okay, you take the structure and that overlays, but it doesn't have to be so. And I would argue that in healthy relationships, healthy work and organisational relationships, it's not always so. It's much more fluid than that. So researchers would say that followership and leadership are co-constructed. So it's constructed, it's made together through interpersonal actions. So we're still talking about behaviours and we're still talking about people doing things with each other to achieve organisational outcomes. So followership and leadership are co-constructed through interpersonal actions to achieve organisational outcomes. And confusingly, we usually call that leadership. We use the one word to cover all these bases, and that doesn't do us any favours. And followers and leaders share leadership responsibility. And researchers who take a followership perspective are interested in how followers understand their role and what they do. So it is shifting that focus from leaders to followers and what do they think they're doing? Why are they doing that? Not what do leaders think they're doing or what is helpful to leaders. So again, it's that slightly different shift. It's just moving your head sideways a little bit. And I would say that followership is different from some of the other leadership theories that Kim mentioned earlier. It's even, I think, different from servant leadership. Very often when I talk about followership with people for the first time, they go, oh, so it's like servant leadership. That's where people tend to initially go with this. Not really. So servant leadership is explicit about the importance of followers and the importance of followership. And that's a good thing, at least we're paying attention to them. And we're doing it in a kindly way. But it remains focused on the leader and what she or he should be doing in their leader role. So it's not focused on followers and followership. So I'd say that that's a distinction from leadership theories, even the good ones. So if we're thinking this way about following and about leading differently in organisations, it's intrinsically radical. It's saying that power resides with the followers. It's questioning how we see organisational structures. It's questioning the nature of power in organisations. It's questioning the status quo. So it's an intrinsically radical way of thinking about the world, and it provides an alternative view of where power sits and what is powerful. So some implications of taking followership seriously. If we're going to go down this radical path, what will it mean? One implication is a really deep mutual respect for each other and the roles that each is playing at a particular point in time. Not the lip service that people are our most important asset, but a real deep mutual respect for each other and what we're doing. It's not linked to hierarchy. May be overlaid by organisational structures, but it's not intrinsically linked to hierarchy. Leading and following is fluid. We all do both. And in a healthy relationship, that leadership and followership will often flow between the manager and the staff member, for example, or between the minister and the congregation. There is a sense in which both leaders and followers step up to lead and step up to follow, and step back to allow others to lead and to allow others to follow. It's almost like there's a dance happening. That we're stepping up, we're stepping back. We're making space, we're filling space. And when your partner makes space for you to lead or to follow, you better step into it or nothing's going to happen. And likewise, if you're both trying to fill the same space, that's not going to work either. So there is a generosity to this and allowing and supporting. So in the work that I did, I identified 2 groups of core followership behaviours, and I called them stepping up and stepping back. One group of behaviours is about deferring to the leader to let them lead. That's active. And the other is about supporting the leader to help them make good decisions. Okay? Leadership is granted to leaders by followers. In the traditional leadership materials, we would say that leaders make a claim. The first thing that happens in the process is that a leader claims leadership. I'm the leader, and then that's accepted and away we go. I don't think that's correct. I think leadership is granted by followers. A leader can say, I'm a leader, I'm a leader, I'm a leader. But if, again, they're not being followed, they're not leading. I would even go so far as to say that leadership might be gifted to leaders by followers. And it's a gift that needs to be accepted by the leader for this partnership and relationship to start working. Followership can be withdrawn. It can be withdrawn in an instant. So where does the power lie in the relationship? Followership, therefore, has real responsibilities. Who are you following and why and how? And are you still following them? Is it still appropriate to follow? It's active and it's powerful, and the whole point is to achieve a common goal. So how might some of these understandings about followership line up with a faith-based way of looking at the world and looking at relationships? So I've got a few ideas, and then we'll open it up to conversation because I'm really curious to know what you think about this. So I think there's a few. I think one is that it's not about individual ego, and it's not about exercising power. It is about working together for a larger reason. And the language we use for that larger reason will vary from place to place. And we might use old-fashioned language like the kingdom. We might choose not to use that language, but we're in this together for something so much bigger than ourselves. There's an emphasis on the relational. There's a fluidity between influencing and being influenced. We come from a tradition, and it's certainly in the Jewish tradition, of arguing with and wrestling with God. And we might not think about a God who changes God's mind, but there are stories about God being influenced. And in our own tradition, we have stories of Jesus debating, even with women, even with Samaritan women, and being engaged in real, honest, respectful debate and being persuaded. And there's a radical equality to all of this. Everyone is valuable. No one should be left out. And those with title or status or power are not intrinsically more important than those without. And now I'm really curious to know what you think. Kim. Do I stand here?
Yep.
For the grilling?
So as I mentioned before, we had a speaker behind the banner. So
Behind the banner,
so
I
I-
reserve the right.
I suggested that Ruth just be a little bit further away so that people who want to ask a question, I'll move, but I won't be right behind the banner. So who would like to kick off? Otherwise, as you can imagine, I've got a million questions.
You ask difficult questions though, Kim. I'm hoping somebody else...
No, well, let me just say that I once did a course with other senior executives called Leaders, Bosses and Bastards, just to underline one of the points you made about how followership can be withdrawn. And in Australia, if it's withdrawn, it's very hard to become a leader again after they've withdrawn their consent. As a question?
I don't know if it's a question, but I...
Come on down,
No,
because we won't hear you.
That's okay, we can...
Okay, we'll repeat it.
It's all right. Well, towards the end, you use the word ego, and I really think that's a crucial thing in the whole concept, because unless you can have a leader that doesn't have an ego, then you're not going to have a collaborative group. Is that what you think?
So for the folk at home, the question was about ego. So Julie's wondering unless you have a leader who doesn't have an ego, who's willing to forego that, then you don't have the sort of relationship that we're talking about. Is that a reasonable summary? Okay, this is what I think, and this is Ruth just thinking. I've not done, this is... slightly based on some research by other people. I'll tell you when it's their ideas and not mine. I don't think it's about leaders or followers not having any ego. I think the common purpose bit is really important. So you're working together not for self-aggrandisement or to make someone more important or feel more important. You're working towards this other thing that you've agreed is more important than either of your egos, if you like. There is work, I'm thinking of work that's done, I know Chad Chow has been doing some in this space. There are others as well, and I've lost their names, I'm sorry. But the idea of humble leadership and humility in leadership. And I think there are some really nice parallels between humble leadership and then how does followership fit into that. Unfortunately, they've not gone with the followership bit yet, but in terms of humility and leadership, that being able to say that they don't know, relying on the expertise of followers, being leaders, and we're talking about people in a hierarchy again. So let's use the word manager instead, although they won't like that. So being managers who are able to listen, willing to listen, able to change their minds, I think all of that fits with the notion of humble leadership, and it has been shown that it's valuable, it's useful. You have better results for your followers. You have better results in terms of achieving organisational goals. So yeah, ego is a part of it. Working for a common good and humility goes a long way.
Yes, Sarah.
How important is the concept of mutuality? And in your travels, do you think collectively, today, we really understand what that means? And I think it ties in with the whole idea of humility. I could give you an essay on mutuality, but I won't. I'll leave you with the question.
Before you go away,
Yes.
can you give me, I think I know what you mean by mutuality, but just so we can be sure, have you got a wee definition?
So when I think of mutuality, I confess, and it's because I'm immersed in biblical literature, I'm thinking of the kind of mutual encouragement that Paul exhorts and Jesus embodies, that has two people bring their full selves to any relationship, and you can have a hierarchy within it. You can have a power imbalance within it, but there is mutual respect given and received. There is that dance of stepping in, and there is a sense of that kind of humble leadership and followership that says, this is who I am and what I bring to this relationship and this task, without with that responsibility of stepping in and stepping up, and stepping out. Does that?
Yep. And I could answer that by just saying yes. So yes, I agree with you. And I think, what term did I use? It's getting late. Because I think we may be talking about almost the same thing and using a couple of different words here. So let me just, sorry, I have gone blank. What was the word I used? I think when I talk about mutual respect, that's what I mean. And you say that there can be hierarchy within that relationship. Yes, I think there can, and I work in organisations, so in an organisational context, I don't think that means one person is intrinsically more valuable than the other, and I know you don't either. I also think that in organisations, despite hierarchy, the leadership and followership will shift. And it may be that a manager has a staff member who has particular expertise or technical skills or lived experience that the manager doesn't have and absolutely relies on. And so that's an example of when that will shift. And a wise manager will allow that, not allow because they're the leader, but step back so that that person can lead, and then it'll flow back again. I think that happens in that hierarchical sense quite often, and I think partners can operate sort of outside of their hierarchical roles. I think it also happens in peer relationships where there isn't that hierarchy, but where leadership and followership flows between the two. It's usually easier to see when it lines up with hierarchy, or in the case of middle managers who are following up and leading down in terms of organisational hierarchy, but they're not always taking that role. Does that, have I answered your question, or should I just have stuck with yes?
I mean, I agree. I think we're talking about the same thing using different language, but that sense of mutuality that says, I am fully human only with you, and have we lost that as humans? And if we could recapture that, maybe we could actually live better into healthier leadership and followership.
I think so, and I think that's possibly what the whole notion of authentic leadership is trying to get at. I think it's been bastardised, but I think that was where that started. Yeah, I think in organisations we haven't necessarily done it very well, but yeah.
Yes, come on down.
Unlike the other people in the seat, I'll come up front, I'm not scared. There are a hell of a lot of things going through my mind.
Good.
You know, we're just swirling. I was thinking of what's happening at the moment with Trump and the Pope. You know, here you've got someone very humble that's meeting someone that perhaps isn't so humble. I don't know whether I've got that right or not, but... and it just occurs to me that surely the starting point in all of this is an alignment of values. And where do we see that in any corporation at the moment? When you've got, well, you can pull out anybody, you know, Westpac or, you know, anywhere where you've got leaders earning, you know, 20, 30 times what a worker earns. What kind of value is that? So you're setting up immediately a hierarchy which is very difficult to break down, I would have thought. Yep. Yes, it may work in something like a church environment where you've got values somewhat aligned, where you've got this imperative. We're in a capitalist system, whether we like it or not. Yep. And I just think until you've worked on a values clarification, I think you're not going to get anywhere. I mean, I'm sorry, that's a bit cruel, but you know, perhaps can you tell us where it is working? I mean, are there real places that it is working?
I think that's why in an organisational context I use the terminology shared purpose. So your shared purpose might be to make a lot of money. Your shared purpose might be to provide services. Organisations have a whole lot of shared purposes. And I also would say that there are many cultures within an organisation. So the shared purpose of the finance team might not be the shared purpose of the marketing team, but across the organisation, you know, organisations exist to do particular things in particular ways. Now, yes, we do live in a capitalist society, and I remember having a conversation early on with one of my PhD supervisors who was pushing that point, you know, the how far back do you go? And I did look at her and go, would you like me to quote Marx? And she thought that that might be a little much for, you know, the management discipline. And so sadly, I wasn't able to go there. But yeah, it is countercultural. But I talk to people, and I spoke to a group of CEOs this morning. One of them works for an organisation that is a cooperative. So the staff members are shareholders. It's unusual here. It's less unusual in Europe. And so when I was talking about this way of thinking about leadership and followership, she's going, oh yeah, that's how my organisation has to work. Because I think they have 500 staff, they're all shareholders. So they're a particular sort of stakeholder before they look at who they're providing service to, and the regulators and the government, and you know, all the other stakeholders, the constellation of them. So I think it can work. I also think they're not everywhere, because those who benefit from the power structures are a little loath to question them. But within organisations, people know that it's not really working and they want to do leadership differently. With the focus on psychological safety that's now legislated, it's starting to get a little bit of traction, because leaders, we can't have leaders burning out by requiring them to do everything about everything. So how are we going to do that differently? It has to be through a much more mutual and respectful way of working together. So it's not the mainstream voice yet, but even in the time since I started my PhD, which is, you know, and that took longer than it should have done, I think the tide is starting to turn. So I'm a little Pollyanna optimistic. But there are places where, you know, this will never fly, because it's not in the interest of those who are doing quite nicely out of how things are currently done to change anything.
Yes, we do have another question.
I've got major swirl in my brain too, like Rod. I think one of the many things that's going around in my head is the reality is that a lot of people have jobs in organizations because they've got to work and make money to feed their families. Yep. But if they go up to what the actual values of that organization are and what that organization is trying to achieve. I'll just leap for a minute to talk about a friend of mine when I was much younger who said, if you ever go and work for the Department of Defense, I will disown you. Well, you know, a lot of people work for organizations that maybe are doing things that they'd rather those organizations did not do. So you have a situation where I think many people in the world have to suspend their disbelief again a bit to get through the working day. So that's one thing that's been going through my head. The other is everybody has ego, as you were saying. And I think if a person is put into a position of leadership, they have a team that they're responsible for. That person somehow, I think, has to be such a good reader of individuals in order to be able to see what the skills and talents of the people in that team are. That's a hard thing to come by, I think, sometimes. And it's not necessarily something you can learn. It's something, maybe, I don't know, maybe you can learn it. But values, that's fine. I worked a lot when strategic planning was just the big thing everywhere. That has to then be translated down somehow into what the marketing department does, what the finance department does, and down further to what are we actually undertaking, and only then, if you can articulate it well, have you got the situation where individuals can come up to the fore. And I think a lot of the problems that I've encountered over my working life, which is thankfully over now, have been about lack of clear articulation of what a group of people is supposed to do within that Russian dolling of here's the values, here's the strategic plan, here's what this team is supposed to do, blah, blah, blah. So that, anyway, just reflections really rather than questions.
I'm going to respond to your last point and respectfully a little bit disagree with you. So yes, strategic planning, we've all done them, and it's that line of sight thing, isn't it? You have the vision, often set by the board, you've got the vision, and then that is articulated, and it cascades down. When I interviewed for my PhD, and I did interview in the public sector, there was a few reasons for that, but one of the reasons was certainly the people I interviewed, they're in the public sector to do stuff. Like many of them could have had other roles outside. Many of them had actually moved in and out of between the public and private sectors. So they're there with that sense of purpose. So perhaps that makes things clearer, but I was also talking to a woman I met a week or so ago who works in defence, and she works on a particular project, and for her it's a useful project because it lessens the risk of harm to service people. And so it's not offensive, it's defensive, and it lessens the harm. And so that's how she does that calculation. When I interviewed folk in the public sector, what was really interesting was the way that those who responded as followers, and I can bore you afterwards with how we did this, but half responded as leaders, half responded as followers. I had some very junior leaders and some very senior followers. The way they saw it wasn't so much the line of sight this way, it was understanding their job and then how their job connected to the jobs around them and how those jobs connected to the other sort of units and how it built up. So I think in organisations, ideally you've got both things happening simultaneously and you get to the same point. And I think that helps with this, because then the shared purpose, you're coming at it in two ways. And I don't think that, more traditional way of doing strategic planning on its own actually works. You end up, with socks with the values written on them and posters in lifts.
I don't think we disagree.
Yeah.
Exactly the same.
Fergus, how are we going with time? Got one more question. Oh, I've got 3 more questions. Max, I'm not sure if it was you or Don, but I think we should let the guest have the question. And by the way, so my question about situational leadership and situational followership is going to wait for another day.
Context is very important. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
So, bearing in mind all of this stuff about the nominal leaders and the nominal followers and all the relationships between them, what happens if, in the place of a person, a leader, we put a sacred text? This could go off somewhere completely different or kill it stone dead, I know, but what happens if a Bible or a Torah or a Quran is put in the place where a leader sits and all that relationship stuff? Or maybe it's just my brain.
What do you think happens?
What do I think happens?
Yeah.
I think, though, the logical consequence of all of this tonight is that those who set themselves up or are put in place as leaders who do the interpreting for other people to comply with, that doesn't work anymore. That's where I think it goes.
Yeah, that's interesting.
You go sit down.
I'm not sure that it doesn't work anymore, because there are a lot of places where it's still working or it's still happening. Perhaps it works better when there's more ebb and flow. And the work that I've done, it is about relationships between individuals, because that's what organisations are, when you boil them down. So the idea that a text or an artefact, that's probably a little bit, yeah, let's go with that. See what that'll get some interesting conversation over supper. The idea of putting a text or an artefact in that place, I kind of go, oh, well, that's different, because it's not then a relationship. Now, I realise then I'm on slightly shaky ground with some of the more progressive folk here who might say, well, can you have a personal relationship with a God who I conceive of like this? And how far do you go? Nick Cave, I don't believe in an interventionist God, but darling, I know you do. So I think we come to different places depending on where we are. I don't have an answer. I certainly don't have a theological answer for that. I think it's a really interesting question. I think we need to be very careful when whatever we put in that leadership space makes our box smaller rather than bigger. So I said at the beginning, I think being progressive is about thinking outside the box. I don't think it's completely unstructured, because that there's got to be something that encapsulates whatever it is we're thinking about. But I think it is important to make bigger boxes, and if it's making the box smaller, then I'm concerned about that. I don't think that's helpful.
I fear we've come to the end of our time, so would you join me in thanking Dr. Ruth Sims? A non-sales pitch,
Okay,
yes.
so this is not me touting for business, but I do have some flyers that explain what I do, because you might be curious. And I've got some business cards. They have a QR code. I write on Substack, and I have a website. If you're interested in what I say about this sort of stuff, you might want to get in touch with me in either of those places.
So I now just need to mention two things. Firstly, the cards that you drew on, the colourful side is the rating of the speaker and the whole forum. So if you would be kind enough to do that, we'd be grateful. We do take them seriously. The more cards there are, the more there are for someone to analyse. The other is to mention next Progressive Forum, which is on the 4th of June, here, of course, 7 o'clock. As you can see, Dr. Carl Vadivella-Belli, and I'm not sure how you pronounce that. Okay, and what can Christians learn from the Hindu faith? So please come along if you're available. That should be very interesting. And right now you can join Ruth and the PCNet task group members here for refreshments in the room through those two doors. Thank you very much.